Are you mad at God? I can't conceive of a reason that I ever would be because I don't believe that any gods exist. How can you be mad at something that isn't real? But that's still the common claim that the religious make, right? Because we all have to be just like they are. Except we're not. The more that they say it, the stupider they look. So let's explore that some more. Let's begin and see what Randal Rauser is doing, shall we? I've got a bunch of his videos in the queue, and I want to keep going because I think he's the only semi-respectable apologist out there. I wish there were more, but most of them are like Frank Turek, who sort of shows up in this video, at least in spirit. The religious keep claiming that we're mad at their imaginary friends. No, we're not mad at your gods, we're mad at you assholes. It's funny how they can't figure that out. The reality is that they just don't care, do they? So, yeah, let's get to it.
This is going to be probably a two-part video series, quote unquote, engaging in a short 2-minute clip posted a few days ago by Frank Turek.
Well, that's your problem right there, isn't it? Frank is an asshole con man, and you keep talking about him without understanding who he is or what he's doing. Now, I and a lot of other people have tried to explain it, but at least so far, Randal doesn't seem to want to listen, even though he's getting really critical of Frank and other evangelical preachers and apologists, and I kinda get that, don't you? You don't really want to think the worst of other people, especially the people ostensibly on your side. So I'm not upset at Randal necessarily, but he really needs to get this through his head. Who knows what he really thinks about Frank, though, because we don't read minds around here. Maybe this video will tell us. Also, I don't have his second video in my queue yet, but maybe I'll add it, maybe not, I don't know, depending on what he says here. Or you can certainly let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see it, and I might try to dig it up. Or not, you never know. So anyhow, back to the video, already in progress.
So it begins with a young man. The context is a Christian and a non-Christian, atheist, skeptic, humanist, something like that, having a conversation, and that atheist, skeptic, humanist becomes seemingly hostile toward the Christian and their professed beliefs.
And that's where it always goes wrong. Because Frank is absolutely hostile toward the supposed atheist, if it is an atheist at all, and he's not just planting somebody in the line who will give him an entry point to insert his script, because that's all that Frank ever uses, right? Now, I can't say for sure if Frank actually does that, but we have certainly caught other apologists doing it, just like we've caught faith healers hiring people to sit in wheelchairs and pretend to have problems, just so that they can jump up miraculously healed, because that kind of shit happens all the time. This is just performance art, which is all apologetics has ever been. It's just dancing on the stage like a trained monkey with their hands out for your money, and that is just stupid. But then again, why should we be surprised at all?
How, in that situation, do you respond to that expression of hostility? That's the context.
Well, because I wouldn't put it past Frank to set the whole thing off so that he can just feign offense. I don't know if that's the context that you need to be addressing, but it's something to keep in mind. Besides, if you've watched nearly as many of these videos as I have, you know that Frank never answers the questions actually being asked. That's the only reason that I think these might be actual people, and even then, I'm not sure. All Frank does is read from a script over and over and over again, answering the question that he wants to answer instead of the question being asked. Because, as I said, this is all just a scam. He has nothing intelligent to say, so he just panders to his existing religious audience because they're the ones buying his books and paying for seats in his ridiculous stage shows. Because honestly, the religious tend to be far too fast to take offense for things that aren't even addressing them. They have adopted their beliefs as part of their personal identity, and anyone who questions their beliefs, well, that's just got to be a personal attack on them, right? Except it's not. These people just can't deal with reality as it actually is. And seriously, what the hell else is new?
So let's fill that out a little bit more. Imagine, for example, a Christian and an atheist, skeptic, or humanist are in conversation and talking about the recent floods that claimed dozens and dozens of innocent lives in Texas. And the Christian says, well, I understand there's a loving God who loves us all, and he's provident, and he allowed that to happen. And that skeptic becomes angry.
Because it's a really stupid thing to say, regardless of your beliefs. The religious, sad to say, they tend to have no filter. They just believe what they believe, and they expect everyone to be just like they are. And when people aren't, and that's an ever increasing number of people these days who aren't, they just get upset because they care more about their beliefs than they do about the truth, than they do about real people, than they do about actual stuff. This is not a good thing. So I can see why people get upset at the religious when they pull this heinous nonsense. It's like the theists who say, the Bible supports slavery, so we should be able to have slaves today. Well, what kind of reaction do you think you're going to get to that? Granted, I think there's way too much emotion on the non-religious side a lot of the time, because a lot of them treat their social views just like the faithful treat their religious views. And that's not a good thing either. Get the faith out of it because it's idiotic. Grow up and learn to think critically. Both of you.
How do you respond in a situation like that? That's the context. So here's what the young man says he's been told to say as a reply.
Look, one of the questions that I've heard people say to ask is, why are you so angry at a God you don't believe in?
And that's a fair question, but that's something that the religious aren't actually asking. They just don't understand the reality. I'm not angry at any gods because there's no reason to think that any gods are real. I'm angry at the idiot believers who promote that God and behave like complete assholes. Granted, the religious don't want to admit to that, so they just invent a story in their heads because they can't handle the actual truth. And I've seen atheists say exactly that to their faces, and they still ignore it. Hey Frank, I'm not mad at your imaginary God. I'm mad at you for being a fucking imbecile and conning innocent people out of their time and money. I can't conceivably be mad at something I do not believe exists. But the religious, as we all well know, tend to think that we're all just lying about it. Well, of course you believe in my God. My book says a thing. Yeah, nobody cares. Stop making a fool of yourself. But then again, they're not talking to us at all. They're only trying to con their gullible audience for a buck. Because they really are assholes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the response he's been taught is to ask a question. Why are you so angry at a God you don't believe in? What do you think of that? Let me give my response in this video.
Me first. Because the fact is, this is all just self-defense, based on the irrational things that the religious already believe. Then they just project onto the non-believers because, as we all well know, everybody has to be just like you are. The problem is, we're not. We are nothing like you are, but since you're not talking to us at all, and Frank doesn't really talk to the people at the mic, he just uses what they say as an excuse to launch off into one of his many scripts, and that's really why asking Frank Turek anything is a complete waste of time. He has no honest responses. I don't think he has any honesty at all. I say the same thing for people like Ray Comfort and Cliff Knechtel and anybody who routinely does this Ask an Atheist shtick, because they're all just using scripted responses that ignore the actual content of the questions being asked. This is really something that the religious learned to do, I think, through osmosis. If you've ever watched call-in shows like The Atheist Experience before, the host will ask some very specific questions, and the caller will invariably answer something else entirely because they literally refuse to answer the question being asked because it's too emotionally distressing. This is all just a defense mechanism, and if your entire theology is made up of nothing but defense mechanisms, as it is for a lot of theists, then you've got something seriously wrong with you. But anyway, let's get back to Randal and see his response. I mean, that's why we're here after all, right?
So the first thing I want to say is I'm going to say this is extremely low on the EQ level, the level of emotional intelligence. To respond to somebody expressing anger and frustration in a context like that with the response, why are you so angry at a God you don't believe in?
Agreed, but then again, if you understand Frank's shtick, you'll know why he's doing this. He is not responding to the atheist at all, if it is an atheist in the first place, which we don't generally know, but we'll just give him the benefit of the doubt in this instance. He's just pandering to the rest of his already religious audience. Plus, you have to remember that Frank controls the microphone. Apologists would never do this if they didn't. That stops it from turning into a back and forth conversation most of the time, which is absolutely not what they want, because then the atheist at the mic could correct Frank's straw man, and he absolutely doesn't want that to happen, does he? The whole thing is very one-sided on purpose, because Frank is a dick.
Because that sounds like it's pithy. It's like a little rejoinder, but it's not a probing question in a meaningful way.
Because you are still assuming that Frank is being an honest interlocutor here, and he's not. He's being the same smug, lying little bastard that he always has been, in it for the money and not at all for the truth. The more that you look at Frank Turek's content, the more obvious it becomes. Plus, and this is something I probably should have mentioned before, but Frank is in control of everything that goes up on his channel. He cherry picks the interactions that make him look good and ignores the ones that don't. If you watch his channel for a while, not understanding that, it starts to look like Frank wins every encounter, when that is absolutely not true. You just don't get to see the times where he laughably fails, because he's never going to let those things come to light, is he?
It's very different, for example, than saying, tell me more about your view. If you say, tell me more about your view, what you do is you actually learn more, you get the information you want, you learn more about the other person and their perspective without offending them or repelling them, or, if I may be blunt, pissing them off.
But that's not what Frank wants. He's got a line of people waiting to speak, and he's trying to get through them as fast as he can without letting anyone linger too long, for fear that they might say something that he can't immediately rebut or make light of. His goal is not to answer the questions of critics, it's to encourage the believers in the audience to keep showing up. He's just pandering, nothing more. The second that you recognize that, the second the jig is up. Because Frank really isn't good at hiding this, is he?
If you say, why are you so angry at a God you don't believe in? What that presents is not as a genuine question looking for more information, trying to understand the other person's perspective, but rather as a pithy rejoinder where you are trying to, it's a rhetorical question in which you're trying to get the upper hand in some sort of debate.
Which is exactly what Frank is doing. He's trying to win while he shuffles people away from the mic as fast as he can. You notice who talks the most in any of these exchanges, right? It's obviously Frank. The person at the microphone can't get a word in edgewise most of the time because he's not trying to have a conversation. He's just grandstanding. The more you watch, the more obvious it becomes. It's one reason why I hardly ever do any Frank videos around here anymore, because Frank is just a fucking asshole. It's a complete waste of everyone's time. Now, I can't say that will never happen again. I think I have one in the queue someplace, but I don't know if I'll ever do it. But once you see Frank's shtick, it's impossible to unsee. So why bother to respond?
that doesn't invite more information to be shared. Rather, what it is more likely to do is put that person into a defensive posture to irritate them and to make them less likely to want to engage meaningfully with you.
Which is perfectly fine with Frank. He doesn't want to engage meaningfully with anyone. He's just there to preach, which is why I don't think he does actual debates anymore. Or at least I haven't seen one in a very long time, because having a debate is dangerous for the apologist. Now, debates are often set up so that the apologist can preach and doesn't have to actually address what the other side is saying, cue the whole Gish Gallop thing, but it goes both ways, and it's not at all hard to make the theist look terrible by pointing out exactly what they're doing. That's why most of these debates take place where the religious can pack the audience. Otherwise, there would be constant boos every time the apologists open their mouths. And I really think that should happen more often, don't you?
Which means you won't understand their position more. What do you gain by doing that? Nothing.
You can gain more money from the audience that you're really there to entertain. He doesn't care one bit about the atheists. He doesn't care about defending his views. He cares only about prancing around on the stage and making a buck, and it's hard to believe that more people don't see what's going on. Granted, that's all that religion is, isn't it? It's lying con men telling stories from the pulpit so that when the collection plates go around, they come back full. We can't know that they don't really believe it, but believing it doesn't make it true, and they still have bills to pay, don't they? Which is why they are pandering to the faithful, just like Frank is. Frank's entire career is lying for the Lord. You need to figure out reality, and I really don't know that Randal can.
Right? You don't actually learn anything about their position or why they are frustrated or angry. So avoid this kind of rhetorical question, which treats conversations with other people as some sort of debate in which you're trying to win debate points. It's not that. It shouldn't be that.
But it is. You are just misunderstanding what's going on. Now, I can't say what's going on in Randal's head, but people like Frank and William Lane Craig and all the rest, this is their job. Lying to people. I have no idea if they believe any of it, but I don't think any of them have an honest bone in their bodies, and I've seen no evidence to suggest that they do. They just don't behave as if they do, and that's kind of the problem. It's why they don't answer questions honestly. That doesn't serve their rhetorical goals. If somebody asks how they can demonstrate a certain thing, you can't just say, I can't. You have to make excuses that sound good to your paying audience so that they keep paying. That's what this is all about. Always has been and always will be. Stop taking these con men at their word, because it just doesn't work.
And if it is that, you need to reassess why you have conversations with people.
To make a buck. It's that simple. And I can't think of a single mainstream apologist out there who isn't doing the exact same thing. That includes all of the megachurch pastors and people that you'd recognize on sight, because that's what this is all about. Religion isn't about truth. It isn't about coming to the best understanding of reality that you can. It's about profit. The only people who don't get it are the idiots in the pews who just aren't bright enough to know better. Now, I'd hope that Randal wasn't one of those. I think he's better than that, or at least he should be. We need to get him to the point where he can see the light, but sometimes that looks like it's not going to be possible, doesn't it?
The second thing I want to say, I think is equally important, is to give a quick explanation as to why and how people can become angry and offended, even if they don't believe God exists.
And that's really the problem. These people aren't mad at any gods, at least by and large. I mean, I can't speak for anybody else, but I can count the number of atheists that I have ever talked to who say that they are actually mad at any gods on maybe one finger, maybe two. I'll be charitable and just say two. But tons of them are mad at the con men like Frank Turek for cause. Or they're mad at the Christians who are just complete assholes. Remember what Gandhi said, "I like your Christ, but I do not like your Christians." Because by and large, a lot of Christians are assholes. They might not intend to be, but that's what happens when you've had your head filled with complete bullshit. And that is not a good thing.
So let me give you a scenario. Let's say that two police officers are called out to a construction site, and they discover in the construction site there's a fridge or an old refrigerator, and they open up the refrigerator and they find a dead child in the refrigerator.
Sorry, but I can't really see how this is going to lead to anything analogous to Frank Turek. I'll certainly let him get to it, but I'm not seeing a good path forward here. Then again, I still think Randal isn't seeing Frank for the fraud that he is. He's still assuming that Frank is an honest interlocutor when nothing could be further from the truth. So I'm going to trust that this is going somewhere worthwhile. Let's get back to the video and see.
Terrible, terrible and shocking. Now, they might think that it's an accident and that that child ended up in the refrigerator by themselves. They trapped themselves in there. They could not escape and they ended up dying. That is analogous to the atheist, skeptic, humanist who believes there is no God superintending natural events, including the actions of free human creatures and the suffering that ensues when they act in particular ways.
I don't know that I'd go with any of that. I mean, yes, shit happens, but I would hope that the police wouldn't just assume that it was an accident. I would hope they would do a proper investigation to make sure that the kid wasn't put in there on purpose. But maybe he'll get there, I don't know. We'll just have to let him get there if he does. Because I, as an atheist, I have no reason whatsoever to be mad at a God that I don't believe in. It's like being upset at Santa Claus because I didn't get the present that I really, really wanted. There is absolutely no rational reason to do any of that, and I simply wouldn't, would you? But if there was some guy on TV telling me that if Santa doesn't give you the perfect gift, well, it was all your fault and you deserve coal in your stockings, I would be mad at that guy, not at Santa Claus, because I don't believe Santa is real. Because that guy is being a prick, and Santa doesn't remotely enter into it. But sure, Randal, go right ahead. Spell out the rest of your analogy.
That parallels that. And so while they think it's a terrible tragedy, they're not angry at anybody except, maybe at whoever left the fridge there in such a way that it could become a hazard for children that were playing.
And I'm not sure how that even works, since he said this was at a construction site. And why would children be playing at a construction site? Where are their parents? We need a whole lot more context there. Was the fridge locked up in the construction office? Or an employee break area? Something like that? I can't imagine why they would need a refrigerator at all otherwise. And if it's just sitting out there in the open, then that's a good reason to suspect that it had been dumped there on purpose. So I don't think that his analogy is necessarily all that great, but I'm probably looking a lot deeper than he intended. So I'm just going to shut up now and let him go on.
But hypothetically, if these police consider the possibility that somebody malevolently, nefariously placed the child in the fridge and shut the door, they would have a lot of anger at that person. Now, because they don't believe there is such a person.
Let me stop you right there. No officer worth anything is going to reject the notion of foul play until an actual investigation has been carried out. So just saying, I don't believe this person exists, is complete nonsense. It is a completely open question at that point. But with most atheists, God isn't even a rational consideration. We're no more going to blame a God than we're going to blame unicorns, because there's no evidence whatsoever that leads to that conclusion. It's why we wouldn't blame Santa Claus before, because we don't think Santa Claus is real. I know the religious really want to think that we're on the fence over this, but we're not. At least, I'm not. The question of, is God responsible, never even comes up. And it won't until we've got some good reason to think that God is a remotely valid candidate explanation for anything. So, no, Randall. Just no.
Then they're not actually angry at any particular person, but if you discuss that scenario, that possibility with them, they might become angry at the prospect of thinking hypothetically that another human being could have placed that child in that refrigerator.
Then that's stupid. I don't get mad at hypothetical situations. I get mad at things that actually happen in reality. I don't just have this misplaced seething anger that simmers somewhere below the surface with nowhere to apply it. I get mad at things that are actually true, and then only if there's a good reason to be. I don't get mad at hurricanes or earthquakes. I'll get mad at people, but I won't get mad at nature. I certainly don't get mad at imaginary friends, because that's really dumb.
That's not a hard concept to understand, I would think. And it's very much similar to an atheist, skeptic, humanist, someone else who's not a theist, considering the prospect of God allowing innocent children to drown in a flood in Texas.
But we don't think that happened. Someone might say that hypothetically in a conversation with people who actually do believe it, but atheists aren't upset at something that they don't think is real. If they're mad, it's at the people who actually do believe it. It's the people, not the gods, that deserve our anger. I don't know why this is so hard for anybody to understand. I'll see atheists say, if that God exists, then it's a complete asshole. But they don't actually believe it exists, do they? It's a hypothetical. It is not a reality. And a lot of theists have a problem with that because they can't imagine that everyone isn't just like they are. They want everyone to believe in their God. They pretend that everyone does. My book says a thing is still stupid. But they're not understanding what the atheists are saying, and they certainly don't know why the atheists are saying it. So what do you think? Let me know down in the comments.
They don't believe there is any God that superintended those events, but they might become angry at thinking about the hypothetical scenario of there having been a God who superintended those events and allowed those children to drown.
I still don't buy it. I'll certainly be mad at the religious asshats who are insisting that God was responsible, though, because your beliefs make you a fucking dick. And if I was having a conversation with those people, although honestly more and more often these days I just don't bother because you can't reason with the inherently unreasonable, but say I was for shits and giggles, then I might play a hypothetically game that just spells out how terrible such a being would actually be, and why nobody in their right mind would want anything to do with such a complete douchebag, if it actually existed in the first place. But I'm not mad at that thing, because at this point in time, I am not convinced that it is even potentially real. I'm going to get mad. If I'm going to get mad, I know who I'm going to be mad at, and it isn't Bobo the Tree God, because that would be fucking dumb.
So again, not hard to understand how that is the case. But you're never going to get to that kind of understanding if you're just getting coached with these kind of pithy rhetorical questions that seek to get the upper hand when you're talking to another person, and they close down conversation and do not allow you to truly understand the positions and objections of other people.
Yeah, but that's not what Frank is after. Granted, he could just be using Frank as a convenient example, but you still have to understand the rhetorical goals of these religious fucktards. It is not the truth. It is just a way to get back to his script so he can preach to the gullible idiots in the audience in exchange for a paycheck. That is all Frank is after. Now, if you want to expand this beyond Frank, then sure, it's a bad idea to do what Frank is doing, and if your goals are more intelligent, which they pretty much have to be if you're not doing Frank, then having the back and forth conversation, that is a very good thing. But that's also something that I don't commonly see from the religious. Most of them are doing exactly what Frank is doing, without the obvious profit motive, because they are just trying to defend their emotional commitment to the faith that they have and not come to any kind of intelligent conclusion based on actual evidence. So I think all of the problems here are still on the religious side, Frank Turek or not. Now, I just went and looked at his comments, and the majority of them come from atheists, no surprise there, who are saying much the same things that I did. Sadly, I don't see him responding to anyone, and maybe he just doesn't. I really haven't paid much attention in the past. But for someone like me, I respond to just about everyone, whether they agree with me or not. In fact, I had to scroll all the way to the bottom to find anywhere that he did respond, and it was just to call out someone who he said was slandering him. Sorry, but for a video where you emphasize having a conversation, he doesn't seem to be all that interested in having a lot of conversations, does he? So that's not a good thing, but what do you think? Comments are open. Go have fun. I've got to get back to work though, so until next time, everybody take care.